Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. I might have missed the Tacitus today there. Seems to have a little kink or a jump when I first hit the record button. In this essay, I'd like to talk about mass migration to the West from the third world and the supposed benefits, economic benefits, or any other benefits for that matter, but focusing on the supposed economic benefits that are delivered to the West as a result of this mass migration. Now, the West was, very rich and doing very nicely, thank you, before any mass migration took place. So the idea that suddenly only mass migration can deliver wealth and economic benefit to the West is absurd in itself, and it's quite clearly a blatant and grotesque untruth. But that's the globalist position that mass migration is going to happen, like it or not. And as they own the entire media landscape and all the Western governments, Western politicians are now nothing but fetch and carry flunkies and stooges for the globalists. So they've been told facilitate them, encourage and enable mass migration of third world peasants to the West. So that's what the Western governments are doing, without the consent, of course, of the local people. But let's just have a look at these supposed benefits. Now, we need to appreciate that the sheer scale of the globalist funded pro-mass migration or illegal migration, doesn't matter, migration from anywhere, the sheer scale of it. Now, to give you an indication, there was I don't know, what we'd call a petition, I guess, an open letter petition, call it what you like, that was delivered to the British government, which is interesting because you get a bunch of globalists getting together to send a letter to another bunch of globalists when they're all of the same opinion anyway. But there were, I think it was 106, 107 non-governmental organisations that are operating just in Britain, and many of these international NGOs with vast reservoirs of funding, not only funded by the likes of the George Soroses, but funding from all sorts of scammy front organisations and under the table payments. They're all allowed to operate as charities, which they're clearly not. So they don't have to pay tax, and that many of the donations that are made to them by the big multinationals, who are, again, globalist fronts effectively, many of these donations then become tax deductible, and it's a fucking scam of unimaginable proportions here. But the NGOs say two things. One, the mass migration should not only continue, but it should be ramped up. Illegal migration should not really be treated as illegal. They should be treated as people that are deserving of and must get red carpet treatment when they arrive illegally into any rich Western white country. So regardless of where they come from or the corrupt means they use to get to, Western Europe, Britain, for example. So anyway, then it goes on to assert that these people are entitled to everything. Why isn't explained, just that they are, and that they deliver huge economic benefits, such as they work and pay tax. And now let's just have a look at that. I don't see the benefits that these people bring. Sure, if people arrive in, for example, England, and they speak decent enough English and they've got some sort of skill or qualification, then and there's a shortage of those sorts of skills in the workforce, or what, I don't mind it. That's okay. I'd much prefer they went through legal channels. And if people arrive illegally, I think they should be sent back. But nonetheless, let's just look at migration in totality. If they speak English and have those skills, or if they're going to Germany, that they speak German and have skills that are needed in the economy, that's okay with me. Now, when we look at the reality of how many people in the third world, which is the major source of wherever there is overpopulation, that is the source of the migration. There's not people migrating from the underpopulated areas of the world. Underpopulated in the sense that they've got a vibrant working economy. People from Japan aren't clamoring to come to the West, for example. They've got a wealthy economy there, and they've got a certain culture that they want to keep intact. Now, some Japanese students may come, or Japanese multinational companies may rotate their staff to get international experience, that sort of thing. But the Japanese tend to go home at the end of it. They don't seem to want to stay, but people from poorer countries, dirt poor shithole countries that are in a permanent state of turmoil of one sort or another, they do want to come to the rich West, and they're enabled and facilitated to do so by these NGOs. But coming back to the economic benefit, and then I'll go on to a few other things, such as interviews that activists have on television, where they try and justify, just through sweeping assertion rather than facts, justify the economic benefits of migration. Let's suppose a qualified person, I don't know, maybe they are a doctor or an engineer or something. There's very few doctors and engineers in the third world. There are some, but if you look at the ratio of doctors to population, then it's woeful. There's one doctor for every gazillion inhabitants in the third world, and so they're firstly not really capable of producing many doctors, and secondly, if a doctor does make it, does get a Western degree, then they don't go to the West and study medicine or engineering, whatever it might be. Then they frequently want to stay in the West, or they may go back to their country briefly, then emigrate to the West. A lot of those people do come legally, by the way. There's not many highly qualified people that do come through illegal channels. Now, some of these third world shitholes, their university degrees are not recognised in the West, and for good reason. The corruption is absolutely rampant in these places. So you bribe people. No one gets a degree through meeting a threshold of excellence. Everyone gets their degree by bribing somebody. So for good reason, those degrees aren't recognised. So sometimes these people, and I've come across them in taxis in Australia, they say, I've got 50 million degrees in this, that, and the next thing, and I come to Australia and my degrees aren't recognised, so I have to drive a taxi. But why is your degree not recognised? Have you thought about that? And they're very simple, very unsophisticated people, even though they supposedly have these degrees. So the very few that come to the West. So every 100. And there's been studies done in this in Australia by pro-immigration groups, by the way. But for every 100 migrants, mass migrants, illegal migrants, the whole thing, people who overstay their visas, who come to Australia, about 5% are qualified and or have skills that are needed in the economy and or have usable, passable English language. So 5%. Now, that are needed in the economy and or have usable, passable English language. So 5%. Now that's at the generous end of the interpretation, so we can assume the reality is somewhat less. But that just goes to illustrate just how small the pool is of people in the world who want to come to the West, who also have any sort of useful qualifications. Now, some of these degrees or qualifications they have may not be college degrees. Some people may have done apprenticeships in things like stonemasonry and that sort of stuff. Now, there are stone quarries in the rural areas of Australia, and it's pretty hard to get people to go out there. The stonemasonry doesn't pay that well, and it's pretty hard to get people to go out there. So the thought, the attitude is, whenever there's a shortage of labour in any given area of the economy in the West, rather than increase wages or improve automation or improve working conditions, rather than do any of those things, which in a competitive market economy you do, rather than do any of that, just import people who are used to a lower wage and used to a lower standard of living from the place that they came from. And they'll tolerate a shitbox house or they'll tolerate lower standards of living. and yet they've done their apprenticeship as a stonemason, or something else. So that's the thinking now. Why is that a bad thing? Well, in a market economy, the economy adjusts to meet the economics and realities of the situation. So the reason that capitalist economies survive and communist economies do not is capitalism has an ability to reallocate resources based on efficiency, whereas the communist or socialist economies allocate based on, well, central planning, but based on ideology rather than planning and the presumption. For example, in the Soviet Union, the communist Soviet Union, they decided the reason agricultural output was low was because there weren't enough tractors. So they started producing tractors quite blindly. Like, how many tractors needed? Well, we don't know. Well, where are the tractors needed? Well, we're not sure. Well, what will we do then? How will we go about it? Well, we'll just produce gazillions of tractors and send them everywhere. So a large part of the economy was then switched to producing tractors, and tractors were needed. So that wasn't in itself an absurd idea, but the allocation was all out of alignment with any known reality. So all these tractors that were poor quality tractors, they were shit quality. So they were sent out to all the farms, but in hot weather the tractors broke down. In cold weather they froze. There weren't enough spare parts, so that all these tractors going out there, the bearings and the wheels would seize, so the tractor would be stuck in the middle of a field somewhere, and subject to the weather, it would be destroyed in a few months. But because you couldn't get spare parts for it, you couldn't move it or repair it or use it or anything like that. So there was, and then there were all these tractors going out, but the grade of oil needed to put in the sump and the gear mechanism of the tractor to make sure it ran efficiently and was serviceable and usable. And there wasn't the allocation or the proper sufficient allocation of oil and various other lubricants and greases and so on. So in a centrally planned economy, these things don't function properly. So in a capitalist economy, the technical salespeople selling the tractors say, hey, I can't sell the tractors unless I've got the oil there and the lubricants and I've got the spare parts. And so capitalism is self-correcting in that sense, whereas communism is not. Now, eventually the communist central planners will get there, but that can be 5 years away before they take all the corrective action necessary, because they've met their quota of tractors, they've done their job, end of story. Whereas in the capitalist thing, it has to work in reality. You have to be able to sell the tractor. Also, you're competing with others that are realizing, other brands that are realizing, hey, if we have all the lubricants and the spare parts, we're going to sell more tractors than those folks down the road there. So the self-correcting thing, and this is where the mass migration thing is destructive to the Western economies. Instead of self-correcting in terms of training or skills or raising, improving pay or working conditions or going through those, sometimes they're a little painful, but they do stay close and track close to reality, and which is again why capitalist economies have survived and communist economies, socialist economies have not. So the workers are brought in from overseas to avoid correcting and to avoid the adjustment that any capitalist economy would go through. So that's, let's bring in the cheap workers so we don't need to make any of these hard decisions. Now, two things then occur. One is that sector of the economy or that job or that company is able to say, well, I don't need to deal with any reality that I can't get people to come out here to work because I'm paying shit money. Why don't I offer better working conditions or offer better circumstances? Then I can get better pay, whatever. Then I can get the people to come here to work. But they don't do that. So instead, what we'll do is we'll avoid all that and we'll just bring in these peasant workers. Now, that means the adjustments not only don't happen, but also starts to create, and it's very much advanced in the West now, starts to create artificial layers of the economy. That is, sectors and layers of the economy that cannot function in any competitive market sense. They can only survive, can only get by and only exist within this sort of economic twilight zone of constantly bringing in cheap, exploitable workers that is tantamount to slavery, in effect. Now, what's slavery in a modern, modern Western economic sense? Slavery is where the job doesn't pay enough money to be able to, house, clothes, or feed yourself in even the most minimal sense. Now, if you look at a lot of an increasing number of jobs in the West now, they are the lowest paid of the lowest paid jobs. And given the increase in the cost of living and then the relative decline in the wages, you're looking at there are, about half the jobs in the West now in Australia pay, this is assuming full-time jobs, pay less money that is needed to rent even the most modest premises, put basic, the calories, the basic sort of keep body and soul together type calories that you'll need, and to have access to any independent transport. So they pay less than that. So these people are forced into living communally. They now have no choice. They must do it. And this again suits workers coming in from third world shitholes where they live communally anyway. So, but this is an artificial economy. It not only creates an underclass, but it creates an artificial economy that cannot exist in any competitive market situation. If they had to pay proper wages and attract workers on the basis of the wages they're offering, they couldn't do it. So this is how the West is creating artificial economies that have to be propped up by artificial means, and the amount of the economy or the extent of the economy, the proportions of the economy that are now reliant on these things is increasing by the day. This is being fed by this mass migration of peasant workers. On the other side of the economic benefit, the argument goes that all these people are coming in to do jobs that local people won't do. Now, again, that's at a huge stretch, it's somewhat true. But again, the reality is that if in a market, a competitive economy, if you can't get workers, you offer more, you pay more. Now, there's a view today in terms of wages and inflation in the West amongst the globalist controlled business sector, is that any increase in cost inputs is seen as inflationary, as in it reduces the profit margins of the business sector. So when wages go up, that's perceived as tantamount to an evil almost today. Whereas if business puts up prices, as we've seen recently, citing the price of oil, whatever, or the disruptions to the supply chain because of COVID and these sorts of things, we've seen that most foodstuffs have gone up. For example, a loaf of bread's gone up from $3.30 to $5. It's gone up by 50% in effect. Now, the cost inputs haven't gone up by 50%. So clearly there's a very substantial profit margin. So the situation is that any inflationary pressures that increase the profit margin for business are considered as quite acceptable. Nothing wrong with that at all. But those cost increases, of course, increasing the cost of living. But any cost increases in the cost inputs of business, for example, wages going up, that's viewed as being terrible and unacceptable, and instant and immediate action must be taken by ramping up the mass immigration. Now, this means business doesn't have to make the hard decisions and make the adjustments to a market economy that they otherwise would have to make, which would make that business more efficient and it would make it more accountable to economic reality. But now they can just bypass reality and go straight to mass migration of peasants. And these people aren't skilled, far from it. So these are people who are coming in to do the more menial, repetitive tasks, and where jobs are being reduced to just a checklist of, do this now, do that. And even doctors, doctors at the local medical centre, what they know about medicine and everything, it's hard to say, but they just resort to checklists now. Particularly the brown doctors with modest English, just straight checklist type medicine, and I'm not sure they know anything about it. So when you look at these people coming in, these migrants coming in, they're not adding to the economy at all. They're causing large economic dislocation, and they're causing a departure from capitalist, market-driven, competitive economics, commercial activity in the marketplace. And this is a huge danger, a huge overhang now on the rest of the economy. And it's something that the body politic, no one wants to deal with it. So there's this idea of mass migration being an economic benefit. I can't see any benefit. There's a benefit to people like property developers, but that's not coming from the mass migrants. That's coming from offshore property investors that are buying up property all over the West. And I see this, just taking some time one day, there were a whole bunch of property auctions sort of just quite close to each other, and they were staggered half an hour apart. And so I thought I'd just go along to those auctions there. Not a single white person there, or not bidding anyway. Everybody bidding is a black and brown person here. Most of them who can't speak English, and they've hired a property spotter, come local property hustler to do the running around for them, and they've just turned up for the sport and the theatre of watching an Australian auction take place. But these are people who are so wealthy they don't even, if the property sells for twice what the listed price was, they don't even blush. So whereas local people who've got to have to work at a job, a 9-to-5 job, and save up the money, they've got no chance in that sort of thing. So those are the people buying the property, and the property developers are doing quite well out of that. But that's not the mass migration is achieving. That's offshore property investment. Also, there are various other laws that are being bypassed. For example, mass migrants coming in and staying 15 or 20 to a 2-bedroom apartment. Now that's illegal in this country, but the authorities just look the other way and just shrug, and that's allowed. So again, we're seeing this lowering of the bar for brown and black third world people, but something that wouldn't be permitted if the family or the group was white. So there are various other costs to the economy and quality of life that are big issues. But looking at the people that are getting interviewed from the pro-mass migration, there's an international script that they've developed. These pro-migration activists, there's an international script they've developed, and they stick doggedly to it. A lot of the journalists that are covering it are all mass migration activists masquerading as journalists, and so and you have to admire them when they get interviewed. They never answer a question. They just come back to a sweeping assertion. The people of England want these migrants to be dealt with fairly and humanely and given everything they need. Well. These illegal people are coming in, and the people of England are demanding that these people get everything they want. Well, which English people are these? What a sweeping assertion to make. But you can tell the young woman who's, well, young, she's probably about 30, I guess, but she sounds like she's in a high school debating team, talks like it, looks like it too. They've been trained and coached to just make assertions, sweeping assertions like that. It's only fair that these migrants who are fleeing death, destruction, and persecution. Whoa! They're coming from France. What death and destruction are they coming from France? vulnerable people are entitled. Well, vulnerable how? They've put themselves in a vulnerable position. Why is that someone else's problem now? Well, why do they put themselves in a vulnerable position and then it's someone else's problem to bail them out? Well, why is that? But again, they don't answer the question. It's just that these people are being oppressed, and so they just keep on with the ideological one sweeping assertion after another, and don't. But it goes to show you how well funded, well scripted, well organised this mass migration, illegal or otherwise, mass migration scam is. But I don't know about you. I can't find a single economic benefit of mass migration. There are businesses out there that can only survive that are only in existence because of the cheap peasant labour that comes in and under the table payments and labour hire scams and all this sort of stuff, which the Western governments just look the other way about. And you very rarely see a prosecution on this, whereas the number, if they really went after it, the prosecutions would be off the charts. So I can't see a single economic benefit. I think it's creating an economy with so much dysfunction built into it that it's inevitably going to run into serious problems given the amount of dysfunction and the shrinking proportion of the economy that's subject to market forces. You've been with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.